They once lived among the great early clans of the dwarves, but banished from their homes, they would form a new race and would come to be among the most bitter enemies of the elves. The most well-known of these dwarves would come to embody the tragedy of their race and the great evil they could bring about. His tale is one of the few that has not been wholly told, as there is a poem about this character that remains unreleased to this very day. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover Mîm and the Petty-dwarves. The seven fathers of the dwarves awoke sometime after the awakening of the elves, which was long before the First Age. Húrin establishes khazad-dum. 4 dwarf fathers awake in the east, and the remaining 2 awake in the Blue Mountains, founding Nogrod and Belegost. But there would be an 8th group of dwarves that would enter into the story of Middle-earth only in these early days. These dwarves were outcasts from the other clans. Many were fugitives due to their own evil deeds. Others left or were driven out from the communities, being deformed or undersized, or slothful and rebellious. It is said that long before the return of Morgoth, that would come at the beginning of the First Age, these outcast dwarves wandered westward into Beleriand. They become diminished in both stature and in smithcraft, and take to living lives of stealth. They were the first of all dwarves to cross the Blue Mountains into Beleriand, and before the elves arrived, they established the strongholds of Nulukisdin and Sharbund. Due to their early arrival in Beleriand, these dwarven outcasts were the first dwarves the elves would meet. In the Silmarillion, we are told that the elves, not knowing what these creatures were, hunted and killed the dwarves. Only after realizing they were beings of intelligence and not mere beasts did they leave them alone. However, in the History of Middle-earth volume, The War of the Jewels, we see some of Tolkien's writings that may indicate both dwarves and elves were in the wrong. First, we learn that the elves seldom caught sight of the dwarves in clear light. In this version, it is said the Eldar only found out about them when the dwarves attacked by stealth at night. Believing them to be animals, the Sindar elves called them Levain ta Dail, which means two-legged animals. Later, they would be called Noigith Nibin, and ever after, they are known as the Petty-dwarves. Despite the fact that the dwarves of the other clans did not think highly of the Petty-dwarves, they harbored ill will toward the elves for having hunted and slain their lesser kin. This grievance would be put aside as the dwarves of the Blue Mountains would make treaties with the Sindar, in part because the Petty-dwarves had attacked the elves in ambush and never declared themselves to the elves. However, the Petty-dwarves themselves would hold a hatred for all elves so long as their race would endure. One of the earlier mentioned dwellings of the dwarves, Nulukisdin, is where Galadriel's brother Finrod would come seeking to establish a stronghold at the behest of Ulmo. Even by this time, in 52 of the First Age, it is believed the Petty-dwarves had begun to dwindle in number. They feign friendship with Finrod and help him to build the realm of Nargothrond in exchange for generous reward. However, in an act of treachery, their chieftain Mîm would attempt to murder Finrod in his sleep. This failed attempt would lead to the elves driving out all the Petty-dwarves. Their only remaining dwelling place is Sharbund, also known as Amon-Ruth, the Bald Hill. We are told the Petty-dwarves loved none but themselves, and while they feared and hated the orcs, they hated the elves no less. Above all, they hate the Noldor, for they saw them as usurpers who had stolen their lands and homes. Over the centuries, the Petty-dwarves would continue to dwindle, until at last, only 3 would remain: Mîm and his sons Ibun and Khim. These 3 would enter into the story of Turin Turambar in 486 of the First Age, when Turin's outlaws discover them one night in the wilderness. They capture Mîm, and an archer shoots an arrow at his sons as they flee. Mîm agrees to take the men to his home, a place where Turin's company could live without fear of being found by Morgoth's forces. Mîm takes them to Amanruth, but now calls it Bar and Danwaith, the House of Ransom. They arrive to find Húrin has been killed by the arrow shot by the archer. Turin's genuine remorse at the loss of Mîm's son earns some measure of respect from the dwarf, though Mîm would pronounce a curse upon Androg, the archer who had loosed the arrow.
"You speak like a dwarf lord of old, and at that I marvel. Now my heart is cooled, though it is not glad. My own ransom I will pay, therefore you may dwell here if you will. But this I will add, he that loosed the shaft shall break his bow and his arrows, and lay them at my son's feet. And he shall never take arrow nor bear bow again. If he does, he shall die by it. That curse I lay on him."
Androg was afraid when he heard of this curse, and though he did so with great grudge, he broke his bow and his arrows and laid them at the dead dwarf's feet. But as he came out from the chamber, he glanced evilly at Mîm and muttered, "The curse of a dwarf never dies, they say, but a man's too may come home. May he die with a dart in his throat." As the story unfolds, it seems as though a friendship may develop between Turin and Mîm. Throughout the coming winter, Turin would sit for many long hours listening to the dwarf's lore and tales of his long life. However, the arrival of an old friend of Turin's would ignite an old hatred in Mîm. For Beleg's strongbow, one of the greatest elves of the age, would finally locate his friend and would stay for a time in Bar and Danwaith. The dwarf despises the elf and resents his friendship with Turin. His hatred only grows when Beleg heals Androg from a poisoned arrow wound, thwarting Mîm's curse, at least for the time being. One night, Mîm and Ibun are captured by orcs. Mîm would betray Turin's company, though he would request that Turin himself not be slain. We are never told what becomes of Ibun, though it is possible he was killed by these very orcs, or in some later mishap. Thus, guided by Mîm, the orcs come to the secret dwelling and destroy the company. Androg is once again hit with an arrow, and though mortally wounded, his last act would be to cut Beleg from his bonds. Turin is captured and taken away, and Mîm is left behind. And at length, when all was silent again, Mîm crept out of the shadows of his house. And as the sun rose over the mists of Sirion, he stood beside the dead men on the hilltop. But he perceived that not all those that lay there were dead, for by one his gaze was returned, and he looked in the eyes of Beleg the elf. Then with hatred long stored, Mîm stepped up to Beleg, and drew forth the sword Anglakel, that lay beneath the body of one that had fallen beside him. But Beleg, stumbling up, seized back the sword and thrust it at the dwarf, and Mîm in terror fled wailing from the hilltop. And Beleg cried after him, "The vengeance of the House of Hador will find you yet." Years later, in 495 of the First Age, the realm of Nargothrond would fall to the dragon Glaurung, thanks in part to the folly of Turin himself. 4 years later, Glaurung would seek out Turin in his new home of Brethil, but the man would finally kill the dragon. With Nargothrond now in a ruined state, with no dragon, orcs, or elves inhabiting it, Mîm makes his way to his former home, seeking its treasure for himself. In 502, Turin's father Húrin has been released from his captivity by Morgoth, and after 2 years of travel, and finding the grave of his children, and burying his wife, Húrin comes to Nargothrond. Mîm the Petty-dwarf had found his way to Nargothrond, and crept within the ruined halls, and he took possession of them, and sat there fingering the gold and the gems, letting them run ever through his hands, for none came nigh to despoil him, from dread of the spirit of Glaurung and his very memory. But now one had come, and stood upon the threshold, and Mîm came forth and demanded to know his purpose. But Húrin said, "Who are you that would hinder me from entering the house of Finrod Felagund?" Then the dwarf answered,
"I am Mîm, and before the proud ones came over the sea, dwarves delve the halls of Nulokisdin. I have but returned to take what is mine, for I am the last of my people." "Then you shall enjoy your inheritance no longer," said Húrin, "for I am Húrin, son of Galdor, returned out of Angband, and my son was Turin Turambar, whom you have not forgotten. And he it was that slew Glaurung the dragon, who wasted these halls where you now sit, and not unknown is it to me by whom the dragon helm of Dolfen was betrayed." Then Mîm, in great fear, besought Húrin to take what he would, but to spare his life. But Húrin gave no heed to his prayer, and slew him there before the doors of Nargothrond. Thus the vengeance of the house of Hador is delivered, and the race of the petty-dwarves is no more. We are told that Mîm was old even in the reckoning of other dwarves. Between the founding of Nargothrond and his death in 502, some 450 years pass, while nowhere close to the nearly 2,400 years Durin the First lived in Khazad-dum. There are no other named dwarves that we know for certain to live longer than Mîm. The closest would likely be Dwalin from Thorin's company, who would live to be 340 years old. Mîm the Petty-dwarf is also unique among Tolkien characters, for he has an entire poem and an accompanying prose text written by J.R.R. Tolkien that has never been released. Well, to be more accurate, it's never been released in English. The text is known as The Complaint of Mîm the Dwarf, and was published just once, in an obscure German book from the late 1970s. While the original English text has not been released to this very day, we know that the poem consists of 26 lines of verse, and there are 6 paragraphs of prose which follow. According to Hammond and Scull's Tolkien Companion and Guide, it is a tale about an aging Mîm, lonely and bitter, and how he struggles with not being able to forgive. Mîm's life, like the lives of his people, would be one of great tragedy, some inflicted by others, and some self-wrought. And while there would be no shortage of hostility between the races of Middle-earth in the centuries to come, there were few beings who could harbor hatred like the petty-dwarves. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who make this channel possible. Tom de Bombadil 19, Listen Me the Cinda, Kella Brimbor, The Mighty Mîm, Team Weasel, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, Toby Mob's Music, CCDC Red Team, Nerd Sidgman Anytimer, Pelkey Sports Cards, Mookie the Brown, Christopher Carbaugh, Joe Tepper, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Salim Rahman, Zetrock, Berto Berg, Grand Strategy Nerd, Graham Darracott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Michael Wu, Grant McGregor, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description and purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.